Israel has to take into account. They're going to lose their defensive positions. They're going to lose a lot of the areas that they've controlled and held. Particularly now we're talking about Gaza City. They're going to have to stop that mass operation on Gaza City, which was a long-awaited military offensive to recapture what they called the last Hamas stronghold, the largest urban centre in the Strip. And they're going to have to pull back from that.
Now, it is Monday, the 6th of October, making it, by my calculations, the 731st day of the war in Gaza. You don't need me to tell you the significance of tomorrow's date. It is extraordinary, though, I think, how a random date, the 7th of October, can now be seared in our minds forever. So 2 years after the worst terror attack in Israel's history and the killing of at least 66,000 Palestinians since then, according to data from the health ministry in Gaza, run by Hamas, we should say, is Donald Trump's proposal going to end the war? Negotiators are holding talks in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt today, presumably under extraordinary pressure, not only from the US, but countries across the Middle East. The Times' correspondent in Israel, Gabrielle Weiniger, has been keeping us up to date in the paper, and she joins us now. Gabrielle, good morning.
Good morning.
Obviously, there's significance to tomorrow. Presumably, Donald Trump would rather like the idea of it being significant for the end of the war. It's not looking like that's quite going to happen that quickly, though.
It's not. But that being said, it is a significant day, and it is significant that serious talks are underway and starting today in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's also a key date for Donald Trump, according to reports, because this is the week where the final Nobel Prize nominations need to be handed in. And it's widely understood that that is something that Donald Trump seeks for himself, to win the Nobel Prize, to see peace made in Israel and in the Gaza war. So it's really a crucial week for him. It's a crucial week for negotiations as well.
That detail about the Nobel Prize, I hadn't appreciated that. That would speak to the president's mindset. You've got both sides meeting. Once a ceasefire is agreed under this plan, there's this 72-hour window for hostage releases. We might see that negotiated, changed. But does that tight window, once the deal is triggered, increase the likelihood of each side stalling in the negotiations, do we think?
Any side can renege at any time, as we've seen several times before, with ceasefire negotiations falling apart, with ceasefires themselves falling apart. And there are some caveats or clauses in the current 20-point plan as it stands that are logistically quite difficult. As you mentioned, the 72 hours to hand over living and deceased hostages, that we believe there are 20 hostages still alive in Hamas captivity. There was a report yesterday in an Arabic language newspaper, Asharq al-Awsat, which said that Hamas has begun to collect bodies. They denied that today. They said that that's not something they've begun to do, but that is something that's going to be very logistically difficult for them. The over 20 bodies of hostages that they're going to have to find. In a previous ceasefire deal in March of this year, it was extremely disturbing to Israelis when a body of a random Gazan, unknown Gazan woman was handed over instead of the body of Shiri Bibas, the mother of the two red-headed children who were murdered in captivity. That was extremely traumatic, of course, for the husband, Yalden Bibas, and also for all of Israel to see something like that happen when the wrong coffin was handed over. It's a real logistic nightmare to collect whatever remains there are after 2 years of many of the hostages were taken already dead. So it's a very difficult ask, 72 hours, and that may change in the negotiations.
And the issue of hostages seems to be key because, I mean, it takes away both, to put it bluntly and callously, the hostages are Hamas's leverage. That's why they hold the hostages. So it takes away their leverage, but also takes away Benjamin Netanyahu's justification for continuing the war if there is a hostage swap. That's
right. But Netanyahu has said that if Hamas fail to see through the deal at any point, the war will resume. He said that Hamas can either stop the war the easy way, which is by the negotiations, or the hard way. What will happen kind of in symbiosis is the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners, of which, by the way, there's an extremely high number, including 250 serving a life sentence. And those are very heavy hitters. Those are many Palestinians with blood on their hands, Israeli blood on their hands, who've been jailed for decades since the Intifada. And those names also haven't been agreed, by the way. That's also something that's going to be discussed. We know that Hamas have a list of the people they want to see freed. And there are only 289 Palestinian prisoners serving life sentence. So that's the majority of them being freed in this deal. So Hamas is getting something out of that. And that was always one of Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, kind of coup de grace. That was his reason for launching October the 7th, to see Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails freed. So that's a big win for them. I think we should remember that. At the same time the hostages will be released, Israel's going to pull back, according to the map that was released by the White House. Israel will pull back to the, let's call it the first line of defense. So there is kind of a mutual movement that's going to go on in that first 72 hours of the deal being signed. And that's also something that Israel has to take into account. They're going to lose their defensive positions. They're going to lose a lot of the areas that they've controlled and held, particularly now we're talking about Gaza City. They're going to have to stop that mass operation on Gaza City, which was a long-awaited military offensive to recapture what they called the last Hamas stronghold, the largest urban center in the Strip. And they're going to have to pull back from that.
Where does this lead for Netanyahu? We've spoken with you so often on this show, on podcasts, about how his personal political future has relied on him continuing the war for the last couple of years. Why is he now seemingly seriously entertaining the idea of a ceasefire?
I think we can't discount the influence that the US President Donald Trump has on Netanyahu. I think Trump believes that it's time now to do this deal. There are other factors. The Israeli parliament is about to reconvene. The hard right members of his coalition, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who are of course sanctioned by the UK for their policies in the West Bank and their condoning violence against Palestinians, they so far are remaining in government, and they've said that they will leave if Hamas is still in power in the Gaza Strip. At the moment, as the deal stands, Hamas are supposed to disarm. Hamas are supposed to step down and hand over their control to a transitional authority. If that happens, they may well stay in government, and Netanyahu may manage to keep his coalition intact until slated elections, which are due to begin around this time next year. That being said, if the government falls apart, he may have to go to early elections, and he will run on the basis that he made a peace deal, that he freed the hostages. When he brought it up in a speech actually 2 nights ago, Herzl Levy, the previous IDF chief of staff, said that at the beginning of the war that they wouldn't see any of the 251 hostages brought home. And he's saying, look, I've brought home the majority of them. And that is something that he will pitch to the public. And that's something that he's done before. In 2011, with the release of Gilad Shalit for over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, Netanyahu was always very, very staunchly against prisoner swaps, saying that it encouraged kidnappings, particularly of Israeli soldiers. And he changed his mind at a very, very important time domestically, where there were mass public protests over social justice, social inequality, the high costs of housing and living expenses. And he won back the public. He managed to form a national coalition in that year, and he won the elections next year. So that's also something on his mind, his election campaign over the coming year.
Well, we will see. He is the great political survivor in Israel. Gabrielle, thank you. That is Gabrielle Weiniger, who's the Times' correspondent in Tel Aviv. She's got a fantastic piece on the app today, which you can read about the 5 challenges to these talks. It's so multifaceted. The questions unanswered, the things that are left to negotiate, as we touched on there. But Gabrielle's reporting is right across all of this. So do go and check that out on the Times app.